Can you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your background in a nutshell for the second time?
Yeah, well, my name's Cloyd Steiger. I retired in 2016 from the Seattle Police Department, where I spent 36 years. I was a detective for the last 27 of those, and a homicide detective for the last 22. And then I went to work for the Washington State Attorney General's office, where I was the chief criminal investigator of the HITS program, which is a homicide investigation tracking system that tracks and covers homicides in Washington, Oregon, and Montana. And then we try to link cases using that information.
So today I want to talk about two Seattle cases that you're familiar with, and those being Christopher Monfort and Ali Muhammad Brown.
Sure.
So let's start off with the Monfort case. Can you tell me a little bit about the case? All I know, that's what's been printed online, which is that he killed a Seattle police officer in what was described as a planned attack on Halloween of 2009.
Yeah, well, it started actually before that. It started on October 22nd of 2009 when there's a city shops where the maintenance is done on city vehicles, and it's kind of down by the stadiums where the Seahawks and Mariners play. And in the middle of the night, someone broke in there and lit a large mobile command post police vehicle on fire. And it was a huge fire. And then people work in that place 24/7. And there were people that saw this guy on the property and they kind of scared him off. But long story short, police and fire department arrived there and didn't realize that he had set delayed fuse bombs underneath other police cars and other areas around the yard. And this is about a 4-acre yard, probably a 5-acre yard. And after they got there, bombs started going off all around them, and they didn't know where they were. He had cut through a fence, a chain link fence, to get into the property, even though all the gates were standing wide open. And when it happened, it wasn't a very secure facility then. It is a lot more secure now because of that. Anyway, so that happened, and he put manifestos all over the property. These printed manifestos about police corruption or excessive force and things like that, brutality. And then he had American flags, and he had like big K-bar military type knives that he'd shoved through the roof of a police car and had a big American flag attached to it. So that was, I didn't have anything to do with that because nobody died in that. But it was handled by the bomb squad and the intelligence unit, and the intelligence unit is on the same floor as homicide in police headquarters. And I kind of talked to a couple guys and kind of knew the basics of it. So then we fast forward to Halloween night. It was a Saturday night, October 31st, 2009. And I get called from home that an officer's been shot up near 29th and East Yesler in the central area of Seattle. So I go up there, and I'm the first detective to arrive. And when I walk up, this officer was ambushed. He and his partner were in a car. She was a brand new officer. She'd just been 1 month out of the police academy, and she was just started the second field training month with Tim Brenton, which is the name of the other officer in the car. They had made a traffic stop a few minutes before, and they pulled onto this residential street to sit and critique how she did. And when they did that, a car pulled up beside them, so close that you couldn't even open a door, and all of a sudden gunfire started happening. Well, the female officer who was in the driver's seat, as soon as the car pulled up, for whatever reason, she leaned forward, and the bullets all went behind her. One grazed the back of her bulletproof vest, but then they hit Tim Brenton, the officer, several times, 4 times in the head with rifle rounds. And then the car backed away. So I get there, and I was the first detective to arrive. And of course, there's 70 police cars in the area and at the scene, helicopters overhead, big, it's a big deal. And this car is surrounded by tape, white, yellow tape. And I go over there and look in, and I see that he's obviously dead. The officer is dead. And so I asked where the partner is. She's in the back of a medic unit. I go talk to her. And of course, she's very, very upset. Like I said, she's brand new. She did tell me that after the car backed away, she got out and fired a bunch of rounds at it. She didn't know if she hit it. And then that was it. So I started examining the scenes, and about a half a block north of this scene, there's looks like an American flag laying in the street, and it's really clean. It hasn't been out there long. And so in the back of my mind, I wonder if this is related to that thing. What's called Charles Street is the name of the Charles Street shops. I wonder if this is related to Charles Street. And I just kept that in the back of my mind. And so we got everybody in, and it was we were working 20 hours a day, and we worked 6 days until we finally caught Christopher Monfort. And so in the meantime, though, we had gotten, I had submitted that it ended up being a bandana that was patterned like a flag. It wasn't actually a flag. And we submitted that. I submitted that to the crime lab, and pretty quickly got results back that there was DNA on that flag, and that the DNA on that flag matched the DNA found at the Charles Street shops. So I knew we had the same guy. So then I basically inherited my partner and I inherited the Charles Street case too. So we had all that stuff to go through, and we had a lot of help. There were dozens of detectives doing work for us, but we did more lab stuff and looked for any other information we could get that way. Like, for example, put in the manifestos. They told us it was printed on an HP inkjet printer. So we knew when we found the guy, we were going to look for that kind of printer. In the meantime, they'd set up this memorial at the site of the assassination of Tim Brenton. And a lady walks up, and she's walking her dog, and she talks to one of the officers there. She goes, I was down on Martin Luther King Way, which is about 4 blocks away, where they made the traffic stop earlier. And I saw a police car there on a stop, and I had a brand new dog, and I was trying to get used to urban life. So I kind of walked up to the police car, and I noticed this car across the street in a park appeared to be watching the officers. And she described the there as like a older hatchback, kind of white or light blue. And coincidentally, the witnesses there was a condo complex right where the shooting happened. And there were witnesses they were having a Halloween party, and they were out on the deck of this right above where the shooting happened, and saw this happen, and described a hatchback with louvered rear windows. And it pretty much matched what this lady said. So if you have a question, just jump in there. I don't mean to be a monologue, but we went back and got the video from the traffic stop, and looked for cars going by that matched the description. We found one, and it was a light blue or white hatchback car, older. And one of the things we noticed is that the right headlight was out. So we started looking at all the other. We got, like I said, I don't know how many cars responded to this. Probably 50, 60, 70 cars responded to the help the officer call. So we started pulling video from their dash cams that were going on the way to see if this car showed up again. And pretty soon we did find one. It was coming westbound on Yester Street away from the shooting scene. And a white SUV makes a left turn, and this car goes straight across. Then we look up one that was a little earlier going up Yester, and we see the white SUV go by, but we don't see the car with a hatchback. So I had them. We backed up the video and went one frame at a time until the white SUV was even with the police car, and you could see a taillight on the right side. So, and this is only a 1-lane each direction street. It isn't multi-lane. So this guy had pulled around to the side in a parking lane of this white SUV, probably trying to hide himself from the police car responding. So we knew that was our guy. We traced it. We found it on several other cameras. We didn't know what kind of car it was. So one of the things we did is we tried to find somebody that knew cars like this. And we went to a junk dealership, or had somebody go to the junk car place. And they told us about this guy up in Bellingham, which is about 100 miles north of Seattle. And Bellingham is famous because that's where Kenneth Bianchi killed his last 2 victims. But we sent 2 detectives up there with this picture, and this guy had calipers and all this stuff, and he was measuring. He goes, "This is a 1980 to 1982 Datsun 210. It's not a B210. That's a different car, just a 210." And so the next thing we did, pull up every Datsun 210 registered in the state of Washington. And there were probably about 3,000 of them. So we started sending detectives out in pairs just to put eyes on every single one of them. And we found that 85 to 90% of them were Hulk cars. They weren't running anymore. But in the meantime, we finally decided to put these pictures out on the news of this car. And so we did a press release with this picture. This is what we're looking for, and put it out in the news. The day of the funeral, which was Friday, this happened on Saturday, but on Friday while the funeral was going on, I had a big TV. There's a big TV on the wall over my desk, and it was on. And I was working on the case, and one of the detectives from intelligence comes up to me and says, "Hey, Cloyd, I just got a call from this lady I know. She's an apartment manager in Tukwila, and Tukwila is a suburban city just south of Seattle. And she says, I know her from an unrelated case, but she says she's got a guy who lives in her apartment building that has a car like the one that was on the news. And she said, he never covered it before, but starting Wednesday, he's been putting a car cover over it. Well, Wednesday's the day it came out in the on the news. So, I mean, in the business, we call that a clue, right? So this guy's setting it off. I go, this is our guy. So I asked a couple other detectives to go down there and sit on the car while I got a search warrant. And I called the prosecutor up. We were working on a search warrant when they reported shots fired at the place in Tukwila. So we got in our car and did Mr. Toad's wild ride down the freeway at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon with freeway stop, but we were going up the shoulder at about 60. And we got there, and when it found out what had happened is they had been sitting on this car in the parking lot when this guy, who was later identified as Christopher Monfort, came walking up. And one of them got out and showed his badge to say, we need to talk to you. And he said, fuck that, and turned and ran into the building, to the stairwell. Another detective was chasing him. And when he went around the corner, Monfort was standing with a gun, pointing his head, and went click, because he forgot to rack the first round. So there was no bullet in there. And then went back, and long story short, there was a big shootout, and he was trying to get up to his apartment, and he went down. He was shot once in the face and once in the chest. He was down on the thing, and we got out there, and it was another hundreds of cars this time because the funeral had just let out. So there were cars from jurisdictions all over at the scene. But so we had this apartment. We had to clear the apartment, but the SWAT team guys went and tried to enter. As soon as they got on, they saw bombs everywhere, so they backed up. And then we got a search warrant. Took hours. Had to get a bomb robot in there. Finally had the bomb squad make the place safe because it was booby trapped. And then we, by the time, like I said, I got that call 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time I walked into that apartment, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And what we saw were bombs everywhere, guns everywhere. He barricaded his front door with tires and had a rifle sitting there. That rifle was later matched to the gun that killed Tim Brenton. He had a HP inkjet printer sitting there, but there was a manifesto on the print tray already. He printed some out. He had a bunch of flags in his back bedroom, so he planned to continue this. He had bombs set up all over the place. He had one on the stove with a fuse touching the burner, so all I had to do was turn on the burner as he ran past, probably figuring that police chasing him would get blown up. This guy was going to go out in a blaze of glory, like the Philadelphia row house thing about 20 years ago. I don't remember that. This huge fire thing. The guy intentionally set it off, and that's what he had envisioned. But he was hit. He didn't die. He was paralyzed, paraplegic, and we worked on that case for 5 more years before we went to trial. And at the trial, they sought the death penalty. At the trial, he was convicted but did not receive the death penalty. He's eventually sent to prison where he committed suicide about a month or two after arriving. So he ended up dying anyway. And that's it in a nutshell.
So when you went to the scene, when you found the police officer that had passed away, being that you're a law enforcement official, I know that you said that before, that you can detach yourself with victims of crime. But if it's a fellow police officer, how do you do that?
Well, you still have to. I mean, it's not. I didn't know Tim at all. My older son worked that area, and he knew Tim, and he was at the scene. But I didn't know him, but I knew his dad because his dad had been a Seattle police officer. He was an older officer when I was a relatively new officer, and I worked around him. So I mean, you take that second, you go, but then it's back into work. You got to do it. So that's what you do. Right in work mode, and you're laser focused. Like I said, we worked 20 hours a day for 6 days before we finally got this guy.
What was the feeling like when you finally got him?
Well, I mean, it was euphoric, because it was kind of ironic because, they said the day before, command staff, you going to stop this and go to the funeral? I said, no, I'm not stopping this. I'm working this case. I'm not stopping for the funeral. There's plenty of people there. And then another detective from the unit came by and said, hey, it'd be really cool if you could get this guy while the funeral's going on. Ha 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 ha. Well, that's exactly what happened, you know. So long story short, well, we have a tradition. We had a tradition in the homicide unit of the Seattle Police Department. We had a big case like this that came together. I have a bottle of scotch in my lower dress. We poured it all the way around, and that's what I was doing at 5 o'clock in the morning. Me and my partner and two prosecutors having sips of scotch at 5 o'clock in the morning. By the time we got back to our office, and you know, and then you move on. Like I said, that was the beginning, because I worked on that case for 5 more years after that, getting ready for trial. So that was, you know, we got the guy. So that was, I didn't know Tim or his family. I got to know his family, his mother especially, and his brother. Unfortunately, Tim's he had 2 small children, and then he had, his wife was a nurse, and like 2 years later, she fell off her roof doing something and killed herself. Didn't kill herself, she got killed. So her kids had no parents at that point. It was like terrible case.
Wow, that's crazy. And I'm sure it was like a bittersweet feeling after he got to prison and died, like you said, what, 1 or 2 months later?
Yeah, a couple months after he got to prison, what he did is he was sloughing his medication they'd given to him every day, and then he overdosed. And yeah, I mean, that was a good solution as far as I was concerned. I mean, he would have just lingered. He wouldn't have lived long anyway. He was paralyzed with a lot of health problems, in his wheelchair, and he was only 30 some years old, you know. But he because of his injuries, he would have had other things going on, and he probably would have died a lot. Well, he wouldn't have died that soon, but probably in his 40s or 50s, he probably would have died.
Yeah. I'm sure, especially the healthcare in prisons, probably not that good, especially for a cop killer. I'm sure they treat them a little different in there, the medical staff and all that.
He was in a medical wing at Walla Walla Penitentiary. That's where he died. So, and he probably would have been in the medical wing the rest of his entire time. I don't know, because he's paraplegic. You can't just put him with general population, I wouldn't think. I don't know much about how that works, but they have to be something.
Unforbidden.